Ukrainians are dying. Americans are fighting, funding, and defining the war aims. So this goes back a long time. My political life began marching on the streets of Detroit, Michigan against the Vietnam War. My political awareness began with the Pentagon Papers, which explained that American leaders lied repeatedly about the war, mainly to get to the next election. And Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, wrote a wonderful essay in 1970, which has stuck with me for 52 years, where he said the quagmire myth and the stalemate machine. And he was trying to explain why the U.S. was stuck in Vietnam. And he said that the usual expression is we walked into a quagmire. And he said that is not the right model. The right model is what he called the stalemate machine, which is never admit defeat before the next election. But since there's always a next election, you never have the opportunity to admit defeat. It was only with Richard Nixon's impeachment that actually Gerald Ford was able to end the war in Vietnam. Otherwise, it would probably have gone on for another 50 years if it had been continuous presidential administrations. We specialize in perpetual war for two reasons. One, the wars are almost always a mistake because they are an attempt to address political issues through military means in a completely flawed way. And then once in, they can't be stopped, almost without exception, or at least until 15 or 20 years has led to exhaustion. So we were in Afghanistan for 20 full years from 2001 to 2021. Biden used his first year to pull out of Afghanistan. I thought maybe there would be a year of peace, but that was a little naive on my part, because instead of negotiating with Putin at the end of 2021 over very pertinent issues like the enlargement of NATO to Ukraine, which is the main casus belli of this war, Biden said, I will not negotiate. And so we find ourselves back at war once again. I find all of this deeply disturbing, but am extraordinarily worried that we are about to enter more war in Asia, because we are actually in two fronts now. One is the war in Ukraine, which continues to threaten to expand because, again, the model now is never allow defeat. If anything is on that path, escalate, which is not good when it's two nuclear superpowers. That's a pretty dangerous logic, but that is the prevailing logic. And if you criticize it, you're called a Putin apologist, which I am not. I want to say right at the beginning, I am nobody's apologist. I just don't like perpetual wars and think that we ought to use other means to resolve these issues. But the United States doctrine, unfortunately, is now rather explicit, and that is that to be secure, the U.S. must be the predominant power in each region of the world. So I liken it to a game that I played when I was young called Risk, which is a board game where the aim of the game is to have your piece on every part of the world map. And if you have your pieces on all but a few parts of the map, those places where you don't control could win back the territory that you have. So you're trying to have every piece on the board. Well, the United States has military bases in 80 countries around the world. But alas, for the United States, there are 193 countries, so there's a lot of wars to go. Because every place where we have a base, but there isn't a base next door, Americans feel a threat, or we're told to feel a threat. And moreover, of course, and the deeper point is China is now perceived by the United States as an existential threat to American primacy, because American policymakers cannot understand how we made the mistake of letting China become a powerful country. This was not in the playbook. China was supposed to develop in a way that is subservient to the United States. And so now we call it a failure that we made various mistakes, like letting China in the World Trade Organization or letting China play institutionally. This is obviously a mistake, not in my view because China did anything wrong. And as a development economist, and I think a pretty good one and a pretty knowledgeable one, I would tell you that China has managed economic development better than just about any place in world history, with a lot of skill and a tremendously high saving rate and a tremendous determination to catch up from a century of impoverishment. And they've done it quite brilliantly, in fact. But in the U.S. view, they cheated, and now they have to be punished for threatening American security. So every day you read stories about how the U.S. is cutting off technology to China, telling all of us, don't you dare buy a Huawei phone, don't you dare use Chinese technology. Every day new companies are listed on the so-called entity list, which is the American enemies list of foreign enterprises. And all of this is to say briefly that we're threatening a second front of war right now. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was an exemplar of complete irresponsibility, complete provocation, complete disrespect to another major power, complete abnegation of the one China policy after we had been asked repeatedly, do not go right now. And it's like, in my view, although I have to tell you, everybody hates me for saying it in the United States, I just got more hate mail